Balatro is my favourite game of the year. That's it, that's the review. If you're someone who's played even close to the amount of hours my friends and I have racked up in this game, the reality is you don't need a review. You're in the know and don't require reassurance that this game deserves the 5 game awards it's up for this year, including the biggest category, Game of the Year. For anyone else who may have stumbled on this video trying to look for a reason to make sense of the silly card game that's up there in the big leagues, well, this video is for you. Stick around and I'll be happy to explain to you why Balatro is worthy of your time and praise. Let's begin. The roguelike genre is all about getting the most out of a simple setup. Round-based, infinitely replayable, designed to have you wanting to play again and again and again, to either reach new highs or simply play the game a different way. Once again, I find myself thrust into a genre of game I don't fully understand, as was the case with Animal Well and the Metroidvania genre. I mean, I've played a few roguelike games before. Rogue Legacy, Nuclear Throne, I even gave the recently released TMNT Splintered Fate a go. And while those 3 games are definitely something I've had fun with, the basic idea of dying, restarting, sometimes doing a run and making no progress other than to say I got practice, always rubbed me wrong. I like following a carefully structured but challenging gameplay loop, but let's add another piece to the pie. Cards. A game I have played a little bit of in the past is Slay the Spire. Now it comes with all the preconceived concepts of a roguelike, just instead of controlling a character with weapons, you pilot a deck filled with cards that you switch out, upgrade, or otherwise change in some way to finish runs. This type of deck building roguelike certainly intrigued me at first. I felt right at home working with cards, having a thick history in the Pokemon trading card game. Something about it spoke to me in a way the more typical roguelike struggled to, but nothing could prepare me for what Balatro specifically had to offer me in the same breath. Now, with Slay the Spire, the deck of cards are all original to that specific game, but in contrast, Balatro's deck of cards is a typical set of 52 playing cards. This makes the game extremely beginner-friendly, as it allows people to start with a foundation of familiarity. I mean, everyone knows what's in a deck of cards. Numbers 2 to 10 with a Jack, Queen, King, and Ace, each with one of the 4 suits: hearts, spades, diamonds, or clubs. Because a game of Balatro literally starts off with a normal deck, it's even had me thinking I could get someone like my dad into playing around, though I haven't quite built up the courage or patience to explain to him how a Nintendo Switch works. That brings me to my console of choice. I initially downloaded Balatro on the Nintendo Switch back in April. I'd heard its name through the grapevine a couple of times, but had no idea what type of game it was. Seeing it on the eShop prompted my brother to tell me he had heard the game was very addictive. Without a second thought, I downloaded it to prove him wrong. Okay, so I wouldn't say he was wrong. Eventually, when the physical release came out, I picked that one up on PS5. I'm a big supporter of indie developers, and I have no trouble double dipping, especially when they come with such cool trinkets like these real-life Balatro cards. Yeah, not special. I got a whole stack of them right here. Let's start a game of Balatro so I can actually try and reel you skeptics into becoming part of our cult. Cult of the Gambling. Here's the thing with that. Though the game at first glance does look like something you'd find in Luigi's section of the Mario 64 DS minigame menu, the developer LocalThunk tried his hardest to keep the gambling vibes strictly for theming. I mean, there are still things in the game that are up to chance, but unlike your local casino that'll chuck you out for counting cards, this game kind of encourages it. In fact, the game does it for you, giving you up-to-date knowledge about what's left in your deck, as well as a drop-down menu to remind you of what poker hands are made up of. And these are the things we use to score points. At the beginning of a round, we are met with a score we must reach using something called a played hand. Basically, we create a hand made up of 1 to 5 cards, and the highest scoring poker hand it creates will give you a combination of chips and multiplier, and that will combine to give you a final score. The more statistically unlikely the hand, the more the score, typically. So while high card can be made up of literally any card in the deck, it does give the lowest amount of base chip score. Stuff like a straight flush gives you a ton of chips off the bat, but those hands are pretty hard to come by naturally. Luckily, you can use a handful of discards to get rid of 1 to 5 cards to try and force the deck to give you a better chance of putting together some higher scoring hands. Usually I fall back on making flushes, but the hand you prefer can always change depending on what else happens in your run. Beating a round, you move on to another one with an even higher score. So things do get a bit harder, but eventually, base poker hands will not be nearly enough to win rounds. We're gonna need some help from the signature mechanic of the game. The bread and butter of any Balatro game are the jokers you take along with it. And how do we get these jokers, you ask? Well, the same way we bought this game, with my credit card. Well, no, not specifically mine. We earn money as a reward for beating blinds, as well as based on the amount of playable hands we had left over at the end. Plus, every $5 we keep accrues interest, for a max of $5 extra if we beat the round with $25. So saving your money is paramount to keeping a good economy flowing in the early stages of a run. So now that we have a bit of money, we can visit the shop. We come here every time we beat a round. And while I'll get into a lot of the other things you could buy here soon, for now, let's focus on the jokers. Originally, this game was called Joker Poker in its early stages, and while I'm glad we got something a little more unique sounding with Balatro, I feel Joker Poker kind of fronts the game as more of a poker experience than it actually is, so I'm happy with the change. The jokers themselves are basically superpowers you can add to your played hands. The top row can hold a max of 5 jokers, and boy do they add a pretty thick layer to the gameplay. Some jokers, like the standard joker, will add a +4 mult to any hand you play. Others will add to your chip score. Some will gain you more money. Every joker is different and often requires you to play the game in a certain way to gain the maximum amount of performance out of them. For instance, the lusty joker will add 3 mult to every card you play that has the heart suit, and the droll joker that adds 10 mult if the hand you played was a flush. All of a sudden, if you play a flush of hearts, the jokers you own are adding +25 mult to your score. And now you can start to see how you'll begin to possibly reach those ever increasing scores. Whether it's combining Baron and Mime to trigger in-hand kings over and over, or whether you're playing the hiker that upgrades the chip values of all your cards played permanently. There are a ton of different strategies that can be used with these jokers. Granted, some are better than others, but in a typical 8 ante game, I'd argue most jokers can find their worth somewhere, but sometimes rounds won't be as simple as reaching a desired score. So even though I've spent the video so far calling them rounds, their government official names are blinds, and every ante has 3 of them. You start at ante 1, naturally, and work your way up to hopefully beating ante 8, which is considered the end of a Balatro run, though you can keep going on beyond that. It starts to get pretty unreasonably difficult for just any setup to survive, however. But for our purposes, let's just focus on the main 1 to 8 experience. The first 2 blinds of an ante, known as the small blind and the big blind, are simply score levels that you need to achieve. But the third blind is actually a boss that, in addition to having the highest score in the ante, usually has an added quirk that makes beating it slightly more challenging. This keeps things interesting, as you can no longer simply stay comfortable with joker power to win every round, because what if you get the water, which starts you off with 0 discards? Now you better hope you can play through good hands to win. Or the eye, which requires every played hand to be that of a different type. Or one of my personal favorites, the ox, which makes it so your most played hand in this current run will immediately set your money to 0 if you play it. There's a ton of different bosses with different attributes that you need to consider, especially since you can only ever see the next boss you're facing, so you'll only ever have a couple blinds at most to prepare for whatever debuff the boss is going to saddle you with. Maybe you rely on the Joker card sharp to multiply your mult by 3 if you play a hand already played in that round, only to be met by the Needle, a boss that needs to be beaten in a single hand. The card sharp strategy ain't doing so much for you now, is it? But I certainly wouldn't recommend playing it too safe either. If you don't want to at least try and hedge your bets and work on a strategy, the game will outpace you, and the score will become too much to get to with your piss-weak strategy aimed to simply avoid being debuffed by any boss. Sometimes you just need to focus on a heart flush deck and pray to the gods the head doesn't swing by in ante 6. Not to mention the biggest boss blinds of them all. At the end of ante 8, a final boss blind awaits. While there are a few different boss blinds, there are only 5 finisher boss blinds. The Verdant Leaf debuffs all your playing cards unless you sell a joker. The Cerulean Bell forces 1 random card from your hand to always be selected. The Crimson Heart disables a random joker every round. And the Violet Vessel, in my opinion, the scariest of them all, is a souped up version of the Wall that has a 6 times base chip score to reach. I did say there were 5 though. That's where I have to personally thank LocalThunk for putting me in the game. The Amber Acorn might be the easiest to deal with, as all it does is flip and shuffle your joker cards on top. But if you slow the game down and pay attention to how the jokers are triggering, you can pretty easily order them back in whatever way your strategy requires. As you grow your strategy, it may be time to revisit the shop and purchase some more firepower. As As we talked about before, in between every round we visit the shop. Using our hard-earned cash, we can continue to buff our loadout with more jokers that'll hopefully prove useful for the specific strategy we're aiming for. New jokers can either be sitting on the top row of the shop for a fixed price, or we can try our luck and open buffoon packs. That'll give us a choice between a few randomly selected jokers, but that's not even close to all we can buy here. First, we can rip open these celestial packs, which will give us a myriad of planet cards that will permanently upgrade the base molten chips of a chosen hand type. Depending on what planet cards you end up finding most often in the early game would usually sway me to what kind of deck I wanted to run with. After hours of play, it can be fun to try and bend these packs to your will and forcing a desired outcome to occur. Just try to avoid facing the boss blind the arm, because every hand you play will permanently decrease a hand that you've spent time and money increasing. Next, we have Arcana packs, which contain special tarot cards that can radically change things about the deck you possess. Removing cards, duplicating cards, doubling your money, adding enhancements, all these things will stack to start rising your score well beyond what you need for the rounds. It's all about playing to your strengths, like using the Strength tarot card to turn your 10s into jacks, for example, or maybe using the Hanged Man to remove cards that aren't jacks, or using Death to turn a poor 2 into a strong Chad Jack. After just a few tarot cards, you've now got yourself a deck containing a much higher percentage of jacks. Maybe you've taken my advice and are looking to run a flush deck. The sun, the moon, the star, and the world can change 3 selected cards into your chosen suit, making getting those flushes statistically more favorable. There are also these standard booster packs that allow you to add random cards to your deck, some of them even bearing special abilities we'll go into detail soon. Lastly, the spectral packs. These are quite similar to the Arcana packs, though they are harder to come by and their effects can be pretty radical. Usually you'll need to trade something pretty big to get the buffs, like destroying all your jokers just to give one of them an extra point push, or setting your money to 0 so you can spawn a random rare joker. These spectral cards can turn the tide of a round in the right circumstance, but I feel like most of the time when you're already on a well-established run, you'll just look at these and say, I can shoot my foot off and get 20 bucks? Well, why stop there? I've got 2 feet. If the top row of the shop isn't tickling your fancy, you can also pay an amount to re-roll the shop for another chance at something good. This is usually something you'd only do if you're rich and looking for something pretty specific, or if you're incredibly desperate. Because the game is seed-based, doing stuff like re-rolling the shop basically just gives you the items the shop would have had on your next visit. This does mean you can technically cheat by seeing what's coming next and then quitting the game and going back with extra knowledge, but I do not condone that. No cheating in Balatro. It's bad karma. I know it's a single player game, but still, it feels like bad sportsmanship to do that. Let's circle back to the tarot cards for a quick sec. As I said, a lot of these can remove, add, or change cards in your deck, but they can also add enhancements to selected cards that will trigger special powers when scored. Bonus cards will add an additional 30 chips to the score. Malt cards will add 4 malt. Glass cards will multiply the malt by 2, but have a 1 in 4 chance of breaking once the hand is scored. Lucky cards have a 1 in 5 chance of adding 20 malt, and a 1 in 15 chance of giving you $20. Others include gold cards that give $3 if the card is held in hand at the end of round. Steel cards will multiply the malt by 1.5 if it's held in hand during a played hand. A wild card can act as any suit, and a stone card is a suitless, numberless card that simply scores 50 chips in any given hand. All of these enhancements are useful in their own ways, though I do admit I've never really gotten my money's worth out of the stone cards. Maybe I'm just missing the piece of the strategy to make it all work, but I usually steer clear of stone cards altogether. They always feel like they ironically brick up the deck. Malt and bonus cards are great to have, just extra boosts to your score that definitely pull their weight in the early game. Wild cards can obviously allow you to get flushes of certain suits more consistently, and gold cards are always welcome to add that little bit of cash to your wallet when leaving around. My 2 favorite enhancements, however, have to be the glass and steel cards. While the glass does have a pretty steep risk and reward setup, they are the cards that can score the most in any given hand. If you can somehow figure out a way to create more glass cards than you can ever break, you could be onto a certified banger of a run. Steel cards are far more consistent if you were to, for instance, use DNA to copy a card to hand, and put Blueprint next to your DNA to copy a card twice. You could end up with a deck full of steel cards that will stack their 1.5 times malt every time you score. 1.5 may not seem like a lot, but do that 20 times and you start to see a major difference. Next up we have seals. These little stamps each have a power that can be used to great effect. Gold seals will earn $3 when scored. Blue seals will spawn the planet card card associated with the hand you used to win the round. Purple seals will create a random tarot card when discarded, and the red seal will re-trigger the card it's attached to a second time. The red seal in particular can be very strong because it doesn't even need to be on a card used in a played hand. Steel cards that are left in hand to stack will trigger an additional time if they have the red seal. Pair this with the strategy I mentioned earlier and we start to hit some pretty big numbers. Lastly, we have additions, which are similar to enhancements but also have the added benefit of possibly being on your jokers. Foil scores 50 additional chips, holographic adds 10 mult, and polychrome triggers a 1.5 times multiplier. There is an additional addition that is reserved only for jokers, however. Getting something called a negative joker is very rare. You can force it in specific circumstances, but usually it's just luck of the draw. These guys won't take up a usual joker space on the top row, and so it's basically like having a free joker slot. Since we're on the topic of these jokers, it's important to mention that you can change the order of them by holding and dragging them around. This is very important since the jokers will trigger from left to right, so you want to try and keep your flat mult additions scoring first, while saving your more elusive multipliers to score last. And this doesn't just go for the jokers either. You can always drag and reorder your hand before you play it for the exact same reasons. This is something I've seen a lot of people learn about surprisingly late into their Balatro journey, so it's good to know that early. Jokers can only ever have one addition at a time, but basic cards can have not only one addition, but also an enhancement and a seal all at once. Now that's a strong card. You can either find cards with these powers in the standard packs in the shop, or you can make them yourself by getting the necessary tarot or spectral cards. I usually find it better to focus on the latter, since too many times I've opened up these standard packs only to be met with the stinkiest set of cards known to man that do not jive with my current strategy. Now to talk about the last couple things we can take advantage of during runs. Down in the bottom left of the shop, we can buy these things called vouchers. Typically only a single voucher will show up once at the beginning of a new ante. These are game-wide attributes that can either earn you more interest on your money, reroll boss blinds, give you an additional hand or discard, or affecting the fabric of space and time to revert yourself back an ante to make the game a little easier and give yourself more time to prepare for the ramping score. Or nothing. Yeah, that voucher does nothing. Okay, I'm only joking. Most vouchers, when bought enough times, will eventually unlock the ability to buy their follow-up in games once the first is bought. Almost like a sequel voucher. Buying the blank voucher gives you a chance to run into the antimatter voucher, which literally just gives you an additional joker slot. Most follow-up vouchers do what the first one did, but just again. But some others have some pretty wacky and fun effects. For example, the telescope voucher will make it so the planet card associated with your most played hand in a run will always be present in any celestial pack you open. The follow-up to that is the observatory voucher. That voucher makes it so any planet cards in your consumable slot up in the top right will give a 1.5 times mult for their specified poker hand. Unlocking the privilege to play with certain cards is not limited to just the vouchers though. This goes for the jokers as well. Not all of them are unlocked from the beginning. 105 jokers are accessible from the beginning, with the remaining 45 needing specific requirements to be unlocked. Sometimes this can just be as simple as finishing a run, aka beating Ante 8, or some can be a little more complicated, like reaching $200, or beating a run without using a specific type of hand. Some of the strongest jokers, however, need to be willed into existence with the use of the soul card. Usually found in spectral packs, the soul card will spawn one of the 5 legendary jokers. Now I went back and forth on whether to talk about my favourite jokers in this game and how many, and while I have mentioned a few, I feel like it would just kind of be boring for me to rattle off a bunch of jokers I like. But I will talk about the 5 big ones. The worst legendary joker in my opinion is Chico. Holding onto this one will disable the special ability of any boss blind. This includes bringing the wall or violet vessel's score down to a more acceptable level. It can be useful, but rent is expensive up where the jokers live, and Chico feels like it's simply taking up a space that could be a blueprint or brainstorm. Yorick will start by adding a ×1 multiplier to your hand, so nothing. But it will gain an additional ×1 mult every time you reach 23 cards discarded. Canio is similar in that it also adds a ×1 multiplier, but it needs you to destroy face cards, not discard, destroy. Forever removed from your deck. AAA is the best scoring legendary joker, as it will allow played kings and queens to add a ×2 multiplier, practically making them glass cards without the risk of them exploding. But the real crown jewel of these fellas is Perkio. This legendary joker will duplicate a random card in your consumable slot at the start of every round. And if that wasn't enough, the cloned card will be negative. This is the only way in the game you can get a negative tarot, planet, or spectral card. And it's a good thing too. You can typically only hold 2 of these things, so them being negative makes it essentially endless. Running a game of Balatro with Perkio feels like you're playing a completely different mode. The absolute control you can have over your run, as long as you get it early enough and aren't stupid, is astounding. One of the more popular strategies with Perkio is to get the observatory voucher we discussed earlier and pair that with a cloning machine printing out your most wanted planet again and again and again. It is insane how powerful Perkio is. I recommend finding a seed that contains this joker early on and seeing just how far you can get in endless mode. It's really fun. Before you move on, the last and certainly least thing you can use in a game of Balatro are the tags. When moving on to another round, you can choose to obviously play the round or skip it. Skipping it will give you what's called a tag, which can do a ton of different things. It could give you a lot of money, it could guarantee you a strong joker in the next shop, or even a negative one. And while it can be fun to test your luck by taking some of these, when you start passing through some of the higher antes, it can be more risk than it's worth taking. The entire game is a massive balancing act, where your main goal is to scale your scoring potential. This takes stronger jokers, base hands, and most importantly, time. Getting some of these cards to upgrade themselves takes rounds upon rounds, and skipping them just rids you of that potential. Not to mention you miss the shop as well. That being said, these tags do have a way of convincing me to get them. I mean, a free negative joker? It just sounds so enticing. Yeah, until you realize which negative joker. Let's say you've beaten your first game of Balatro. What's next? Well, you can always play another game on a higher stake. There are 8 stake colours, including the base white stake, each becoming a little more difficult than the last. Every ascending stake colour includes its own unique addition, as well as all the previous ones. Red stake makes it so small blinds no longer give reward money. Green stake makes the score scale faster every ante. Black stake gives all jokers a 30% chance of being eternal, which means once they're added to your roster, they're staying for good. Blue stake lowers your discard count from 3 to 2. Purple stake scales the scores even faster each ante. Orange stake gives all jokers a 30% chance of being perishable, which means they will shut down and debuff themselves after 5 rounds. And lastly, gold stake adds a 30% chance of jokers being rentals, which while it will make them cheaper to buy at $1, each round they'll suck another $3 out of you unless you get rid of them. Be careful though, because at this stage, rental jokers are capable of being eternal jokers. So don't accidentally get yourself stuck in an endless cycle of renting jokers just to make enough money to continue renting them. We have enough of that crap in real life. Apart from stake challenges, the actual decks you use as well can have some variables. The red deck and blue deck adds an extra hand and extra discard respectively, while the yellow deck will begin you with a capital of $10, just to get your economy ball rolling. Some of my other favorite decks include the Ghost deck, which starts you off with the Hex card that can immediately make any joker a polychrome, or the Checkered deck, which contains no clubs or diamonds, just hearts and spades, making it a pretty easy deck to run flushes on. If you want to be challenged with something a little more specific, however, we can head over to the Challenges tab. Here we are set specific boundaries and rules to follow, like the Omelette Challenge, a deck where the only money you have at your disposal is whatever you can get from the Egg Joker, or the Medusa Challenge, a deck that replaces all your face cards with stone cards, as well as forcing you to add a stone card to your deck every round. Yeah, that one doesn't sound like a whole lot of fun, but there are plenty of different challenges to choose from, and I can potentially see even more of these challenges added in the future. So far we have seen some patches here and there, and also the Friends of Jimbo update, which has added some new art you can use on your cards. But how about some more challenges? These are all the things that make Balatro a game you can goal set in. Sometimes for whatever reason, I have a hard time sitting down and playing a game for the sake of it. I'm so predisposed to a game having a point, whether it's an engaging story or a really solid multiplayer. Balatro, on the other hand, chooses to do what games were created for in the first place. It chooses to be fun. Above all else, it values its fun factor and your time. I mean, blink and suddenly hours have gone by, but you can't say you didn't at least have fun wasting all those minutes. Having all these challenges to beat and tick off makes the whole thing really satisfying to complete, but damn does it get really hard. But Balatro is so good, I can absolutely play it for the sake of having fun. I'll play it for far too long, I don't care. The previous 7 antes of game progression has all been about drip feeding the different aspects of Balatro in a way that I hope makes you, as a new player, feel like you can get straight into the game and play. I feel like Balatro itself does a really good job at allowing you to learn at your own pace, but I feel for some people they need just a little nudge to give this game a try, because once you've played an entire run from start to finish, you get completely sucked into every tidbit of mechanic it has to offer. The inviting graphics can certainly take an amount of credit for that. Just like Animal Well that I played earlier this year, Balatro has a CRT filter that I kindly went and turned off after a while. Again, it's a pretty filter and all, and you may be more accustomed to something like that than me, but I'm more of a sharp pixel art enjoyer. Everything is so clean and precise and expertly laid out on the screen. Every Joker is teeming with personality, and with visual gags aplenty. The pure character of this game is enough to offset the fact that the deck of cards you're using is almost 600 years old. As much as I joke, the typical 52 playing card deck is one of the game's biggest strengths, a common entry point that allows the crazy Joker side to seep its way in at the player's pace. And the music. Oh, the music! Balatro sports one of the best versions of a dynamic track I've ever personally heard. The tone ebbs and flows between upbeat and somber as you go from round to round, pack to pack. It's basically just the one track with a few different vibe shifts, and can we just be thankful to the composer, Louis Clement, that this one track is pretty infinitely replayable. I've yet to get bored of it, and while I have begun to listen to YouTube or other things as I play, I'll still listen to the Balatro theme any day of the week, and I can't wait to hear it in the Game Awards medley in just a couple weeks. While I sadly doubt it'll be able to pull through and win Game of the Year, despite being my personal Game of the Year, I gotta just be glad that it made it that far. I'm really happy for the solo developer LocalThunk for making this silly little card game that he originally made for just his friends, but decided to make it for the world. There's an endless waterfall of archetypes and strategies just waiting to be discovered by you in Balatro. So what are you waiting for? Use my recommendation as fuel to fund and finalize that purchase and buy the game now. And for anyone who has already played a ton like myself, thanks for watching me repeat everything you already know. Again, you didn't need this video to reassure you that Balatro is a good game, maybe even the best of the year, but sometimes it's just fun to listen to someone praise a great game, so your love for it can only multiply.